Martin, aka the #1 stoner, for introducing us and setting us up. And I did hear about your book, before we talked, and I was curious because, as we know, Hollywood fictionalizes stuff. So when I heard about Molly's Game, I'm like, I know they're going to exaggerate some stuff, but there's some stuff that didn't necessarily quite add up. Or just not normalized. And that's the thing, though, like whether it's media like CNN or ABC, NBC, CBS that claim to be neutral, there's always going to be a take. It may not be like a hard take either side, but, everyone's got a take.
Yeah, everyone's got their take, that's for sure.
All right, chat fam, we got enough people in. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe. What's up, Tony Bedford, Russell Thomas. This is Houston Curtis, founder of CardSharp.com. That's CardSharp with a K. And if you want to know stuff about deck manipulating mechanics as well as his products, he's a card player columnist, and he's the author of the 2020 bestseller billion-dollar Hollywood Heist: The Truth Behind Molly's Game. So a little bit of a precursor on Molly's Game. It was in a book, and it was sensationalized by Aaron Sorkin's film Molly's Game. I don't think they use real names, so I'll start with what little I know, and then we'll just transfer over. So I did hear about Darren Feinstein was the owner of the Viper Room. He's a successful entrepreneur. A lot of incredible people on the behind the scenes on the down low ended up being very successful. I hear he's killing in Vegas, and some wild stories about that. So,
yeah, well, Darren's a sharp guy, and he was doing a lot of real estate deals back then, which ended up being a bad time for doing real estate deals when 2008 hit. But he had a lot of big stuff going on, and he's also the Feinstein family are famous for revolutionizing the strip club industry in Las Vegas. They own Sapphires, and Darren's a great guy. A lot of fun to play with, fun to hang out with.
So here's where the story probably doesn't coincide too far. I guess Molly Bloom worked for Darren Feinstein to help do accounting, recruiting, or whatever, just some logistics.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't realize. First of all, Wayne, thanks for having me on the show. I'm a big fan of Live at the Bike. Been a fan since you guys started, and I always meant to come down and play. But right around the time Live at the Bike started, I was playing in the big game, and my focuses were elsewhere, so I never made it down. So I hope to one day. But the game. In the movie, they portray it as something that started, with Molly, which, makes sense. But the game actually started in Toby Maguire's kitchen. Anyone who's read my book will know this. And Toby and I met at the Commerce. I'd been playing in some big private games. He'd been playing in some big private games. We ended up hitting it off and found our way to a game together at a guy named Reagan Silber's house. And Reagan was a big hedge fund, not a hedge fund guy. Reagan was a tech stock investor who had been a class action attorney out of Texas and made a pile of dough and moved to Los Angeles and bought a house in the Hollywood Hills and was getting into the entertainment industry. And he had a game at his house, and that's where Toby and I met. And then Toby invited me to his game, and we ended up just hanging out a lot after the games and talking about poker and theory and how to put a good game together. And we just kind of became fast friends, and we realized that the whole celebrity thing was such a draw for a great game. And we started stacking the deck, so to speak, in terms of how we put the game together. But eventually, with all these guys coming to Toby's house, there's so much money that was starting to fly around. Plus, he's a little eccentric, and I've said this before. He didn't like people coming in with, smoking cigars in his house and eating pepperoni pizza, and he's a vegan, And at one point he says, Houston, we've got to get the scumbags out of my house. We got to take this game somewhere else. And we were sitting there trying to figure out where do we go. And Darren Feinstein pops into our heads. And so we called Darren, and Darren got super excited. And he even said, hey, and I've got this, his exact words were, I've got this hot little piece of ass named Molly who will serve drinks. Darren's words, not mine. I said, great. And that's how Molly was introduced to the game in the first place. That's how it all started.
Yeah, and then I guess where do you know the details? I guess like in the movie, it said that player X or whatever, who is
player X is Toby. Harlan Hustis is me, Houston Curtis, Harlan Hustis. And the guy, I think they called Darren Dean in the movie. And I don't know if they focused on too many other players besides the three of us as far as being exact, giving an exact, a real character to play those. The other players just kind of made up a group of players that played. But the other guys that were in the game that some of your fans might know, a regular in the game, Bobby Safai, who's been on, all the late night poker, high stakes poker. Actually, was it Maury who exec produces that? Yeah, Maury met me somehow and came to the game one night, basically to poach players for his TV show. And out of all of us that were there, the only two guys who agreed to go on were Mike Baxter and Bob Safai. And and obviously Mike Baxter was a regular in the game. And then there were, the celebrities like Ben Affleck, and he was, aside from Toby, Ben was probably the most regular, quote unquote, A-list celeb. But DiCaprio, bounced in all the time, and Matt Damon played, and all the people that you've heard have played in the game. But there was a lot of interesting hedge fund guys and record label owners and sports team owners and things of that nature. It was an exciting time.
So the book was about basically how you guys orchestrate and set this up to, I would say
hustle,
fleece people. I don't know, whatever you want to call. I mean, like, people criticize like every industry of being. Like,
yeah, they do. But isn't the goal of anyone who's putting a game together to put together a nice soft game that'll last forever? I mean, that's what I was hoping. I would never have to enter a casino card room again. Okay, I realize now that playing in casinos is just it's probably the best way to go, because these home games, something will happen. Somebody will stiff somebody down the road. In our case, we ended up having a guy pay with, he was robbing his hedge fund to pay us, and it brought the FBI down on our ass. So playing casinos, go play at the bike. But we had a lot of fun while we were doing it. And Mike Sexton, before he passed, Mike played in the game a lot, and me and Mike had a lot of conversations there at the end. He wanted to read the book really bad, and gave me a great quote for it. One of the things he said is he thinks it's probably the best game there's ever been, something like, and that there will probably, because of my book and everything just kind of coming out, there'll probably never be another game like that again. And there might be, but it'd be a long time, because what we had, Wayne, going for us, it was a very interesting time in poker history when this game started. You got to remember, we started around 2004, 2005, right? So televised poker was still fairly new. Moneymaker was about a year out from winning the main event. World Poker Tour was still hot and getting hotter, and all of these people from all over the world were seeing, you just hold two cards and I can win all this money. So a lot of the guys who were playing, these guys had never even shuffled a deck of cards before, So, so what Toby and I engineered was this idea of, wow, if we get Toby and Leo coming to a game, what kind of people would bring a lot of money to sit down for a few hours in a private setting with guys like that? Sure. And I wouldn't, but I was a producer in the entertainment industry, and I was never really, I might have been like enamored if I saw Eddie Van Halen or something, but a lot of guys really, thought that would be a cool thing. So what we did, because no one understood poker, and I think your viewers will get a big kick out of this, especially the young guys who've played a bajillion hands online. They didn't understand blind structure versus bankroll. So we had a 100, 200, it started out at 100, 200, then it went to 200, 400, no limit. But when it was 100, 200 at the Viper Room, you're going to love this. The buy-in was only $5,000. Now, as you know, you can't sit right in a 100, 200 game with $5,000. So by the time one orbit passed, guys were already reloading, right? Yeah. So we knew they had enough money to go deeper into their pocket. And we also knew that when a guy goes bust in the first 20 minutes of the game, he's going to be too embarrassed to get up and walk away from Leo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire and Ben Affleck. Right. And, so these guys would just reload. And so a guy would come with $5,000, he'd end up losing, 50,000. And that's how we designed the game. And it ran like that all the way up until the time Toby decided he wanted to kick it up a notch and take it out of the Viper Room, which I loved. It was real seedy, and we were in the basement, and it smelled kind of like piss down there. But it was great for like a underground poker game. But he wanted to get guys who, they would only go to like 5-star hotels, So that's when we kicked it up a notch and took it to the Four Seasons and gave Molly the game. Basically Molly, I think Darren had threatened to fire her at once because she screwed up something, and she came crying to us and, oh, he's going to take the game away from me. And the game was always ours, so we said, yeah, you can still run the game, Molly, but we're going to kick it up a notch, and you actually need to do some work now. You got to go find some big players for us. And to her credit, she found some, she brought some meat to the table after that.
So first things first, like these poker games, Molly's game in the movie form, it's one of the few things in Hollywood where what you see on camera is actually the tame version, the Disney version of what goes on.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I do want to stress that women, especially in male-dominated industries, are treated fairly poorly. So, definitely, I'm sure Molly Bloom was treated poorly in some aspects when it comes.
Well, to let's talk about that, because where I come from, if you were paying, what do you think would be a fair amount of money to pay someone to host a game, calling in, big players? The game's already loaded with one big celebrity, being Toby. He was at the height of his career, and Toby's going to be there every night. How hard is it to put that game together? And we really already had our core players. So her goal was to go find a few rich guys and to set up the hotel. I mean, where I come from, in the cornfields of the Midwest, you could have paid someone $500 a night to do that, and they would have been thrilled, or $1,000 a night. It would have been like the job of a lifetime. Molly was making about $30,000 a night. Wow. Every night we played. It was unheard of kind of money. I didn't care. I was just happy to be there, and I'm a live and let live kind of guy. I want everybody to do well. And I was making so much money in the game. To me, it's like whatever incentivized her to go out and, keep things running smoothly. So Toby and I didn't have to worry about it. Toby didn't want people around town saying this is his game.
Sure.
But it was always his game. And I would have, if he was the president, I would have been a chief of staff, and we worked together to, to make the game good. And if there's ever anybody who played in the game that we thought wasn't good for what we were trying to do, they would play once and see you later.
Never heard of that before. But yeah, it's the timing of it was just like you said, the Chris Moneymaker, like, and I had Daniel Negreanu on like last week, and we just discussed it, where it's like, yeah, you can be just any random guy and just win the World Series of Poker, but they put the magnifying glass on Chris Moneymaker and not the 99.9% other people who just like busted.
Yeah. And smartly so. I mean, talk about something that you couldn't script something that well, right? A guy named Chris Moneymaker buys in. It sounds like it was written, and it changed. America was already in love with poker and has been since, riverboat gambling days, but it changed everything. Now some dude out of nowhere can invest $1 and become a millionaire. Well, everyone wanted a piece of that, right?
Yeah. Like everything in the news, like, what you see is like super glam. They don't see all the hard work and it took like, years, if not potentially decades to get to that juncture. But that's, but in the case of like, poker, it's just like, now there is this thing that exists where you don't even have to work that hard. If you just play well enough, you get lucky and you could, win this damn thing.
It's now I think there's it's interesting what Live at the Bike has done. You guys have, how many hours of footage do you have saved now? I mean, thousands, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
So I mean, there's probably almost every hand conceivable is probably in your database at some point.
Probably not. Like every structure of a hand. The thing is, like, if you play online, there's like millions of hands. Then you see every permutation. But live poker works so slow. I think there's over 1,500 episodes. But yeah, it's just like
more hands than you're going to get watching World Poker Tour or World Series of Poker. You know what I mean? Because you guys just were running all the hands. And that attracted, I think a different kind of more serious fan. And, I still think, I'd like to think that there's still a place for that fan that had that kind of first burst of excitement when the first time they saw hole cards. Instead of immediately being tossed into, all the new terminology that the young kids are using and the way they think about the game. I got to hand it to them. They've figured out a lot of stuff very quickly that it took years for other guys to figure out, and that some guys never figured out. Hell, I've been playing since I was a kid, and nothing can speed up your game like 16 screens at once playing all day. You learn
really fast.
But the excitement of live poker is something that I think can't be matched personally, and I think that there's always going to be that fish out of water guy who can come and put the hurt on somebody. And that's what's great about poker. It still is a game where, the best can be beaten by anybody. And I think that's always going to be fun to watch.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's just, it's a shift, because back when you and Toby were hosting these games, a lot of people coming in saw Moneymaker win. They're like, I could play like that, and it's like, it's definitely true, and I don't even think Chris Moneymaker played poorly except for like one hand, at least for the
he was a solid player, and he's been a great, I've never met Chris, and I know most of the pros from that era. I mean, I was friends with most of them For some reason, Chris and I's path never crossed. But I always thought he was a really good ambassador for the game. You know, he's seems like a good guy, and he never came off as someone who didn't know his way around the table. You know, he knew his way around the table from the get-go, and he got better. You know, I think he got better. So
as everyone does.
Yeah, you hope, right? So now not everyone does,
you
right?
Hope, don't hope, but
what our game was built around was two things: guys who would never run out of money and never get any better. And we found it. Now, a couple of those guys did get a little better, but for the most part, you know, if you could find a guy who just wants to play casual poker and his weekend game just happens to be playing at a $50,000 buy-in with unlimited reloads at 200, 400 blinds, and he can go, you know, as deep as the abyss, and he's never going to get any better, that's a good game.
Right. So, you know, of Dan Bilzerian and his alleged, like, you know, escapades, was he ever in these games?
Dan came by one night and played, and I didn't know him as Dan Bilzerian then. I had just heard he was a kid who, what I was told was he had a trust fund and he had a bunch of money and this and that. I don't remember exactly how it went down, because if you ask some people, they'll say Dan played in the game a lot. He played one time, and I don't think him and Toby hit it off, and that was not good for Dan as far as coming back to the game, you know. And then I hung out with Dan a little while after that. Actually, at one point, I was producing I shot a little teaser pilot for him, and Viffer wanted to do a reality show. Yeah. It was going to be they were going to open a new strip club in Vegas, and I called the strip club No Limit, I think, and put a little teaser together for it, and then they changed their mind and decided they didn't want to open a strip club. So
call it Top Gun Holds Up. I'm just kidding. So what are the differences between the book version of Molly's game, the movie, and what actually happened?
All right. Okay. So, well, one of the differences I mentioned before, the game started in the movie. They the first night of the Viper Room, you know, my character Harlan Hustis wasn't there. They for some reason decided to bring me in later. But in the truth, if you look at Molly's, what do they call it, deposition to the feds, I was the first name listed when guys who walked in the room. Now, Bruce Parker was there that night, former CEO of Callaway Golf, myself, Toby, Todd Phillips, who directed The Joker and Old School and Hangover movies, Leonardo DiCaprio. Was Leo there? Leo may have come the second night we played, as opposed to the first, thinking back. But Bob Safai, I think, was there early. But the biggest differences, Molly never ran the game, like, at all. I love her, but she didn't run the game. She never made a decision in the game in terms of if there was a discrepancy at the table, if there was, you know, any type of real decision that had to be made throughout the game, Molly had nothing to do with it. Molly was there to make sure that we had a place to play and make sure that all the players showed up. She would send out. At first, she didn't even have to go find players. We gave her a list, and she just literally texted the guys, and then would get back to Toby, you know, and myself, and confirm that, yeah, the game's ready. And so the game was never hers, okay? And the other big thing that I never understood why, I know that there was animosity when Molly had to leave the game but the game was never, quote, taken away from her. First of all, she was making an absolute fortune. And some things started happening that started rubbing Toby the wrong way. And I was actually always kind of in Molly's corner on it. I just didn't want to disrupt the flow of what was happening at all, because I was making like six figures a night. There'd be runs where I'd go, I think one of my runs, I did like 3.1 million straight before having a loss. Wow. So, the game was sick, and I didn't want to mess with that. But Molly she starts showing up in driving a Bentley. They didn't put that in the movie, but she shows up to the Four Seasons in a Bentley. And we got guys losing $500,000 a night. That doesn't look good. When some guy's writing you a check for $500,000 and the hostess is driving a Bentley, something's a little off with that. And she got really, comfortable in that position to make a lot of money. And then some guys started showing up in the game that, like we were given a story once. There was a guy who was supposed to be a cousin to a dude we all knew, this guy named BZ. It's his cousin. He's from out of town, just learned poker. He's a total degenerate sports bettor. All right, so Molly sold us, this guy, and we could tell by about 2 orbits the guy knew exactly what he was doing. He did a big semi bluff on the on this one hand, and I was like, that's not the move of a guy who's never played poker before. And Todd Phillips actually turned to me. He's like, what the deal with this guy? So we said, so your cousin's with BZ, huh? He's like, yeah. How's Jimmy doing? Who's Jimmy? BZ's brother. And we're like, who the fuck are you? So we had him get his driver's license out. And he's like, all right, hold on. And I fired off a text to my buddy Andy Bellin, who he had started the game with us and had since moved back to New York. And Andy had wrote a book called Poker Nation, which you may have heard of. And he started out playing in places like the Mayfair and the underground card rooms in New York. It took Andy about 5 minutes to get back to me and say, yeah, he's a New York rounder. So Molly was bringing in New York rounders and taking a piece of them. And I don't have proof of that, but I know that that's exactly what happened. And so that guy we made an example out of. He was the only guy in the game. We made him bring $40,000 in cash. He left without it, and we said, "You tell everybody in New York if you want to come fuck with us, this is what's going to happen."
Damn.
Yeah, and we sent his ass home. And we never had. Now Molly was taking a piece of it, and then all of a sudden, near the end, it was like some of the Russian guys who she ended up, playing with in New York started showing up, and she was getting greedy. She was getting greedy, and she was already making a fortune. But we never took the game away from her. What happened was the game. Alec Gores, the billionaire, who's a great guy. Alec had been to the game a few times, and Alec actually was first brought into poker by he started playing in a big pot limit game with Mike Sexton, and then that game kind of broke up, and a lot of some of those players came to our game, including Alec and another great guy named Bosco, who's like kind of a legend. He was like rounding back in Doyle Brunson's days. He's an older guy. He was married to legend had it he was married to like a 90-year-old billionaire. He was like one of these, he had to be 70 himself, but he always wore like $1 million suit, never balked over a bad beat. And he was a really good player, a lot of fun to play with. Didn't mind writing a big check, but he could, he definitely knew what he was doing. So some of those guys came over into our game, including Alec. And when you get a guy like Alec and he's learning the game, it's fantastic. I mean, this guy's a billionaire. He had more money than everyone at the table put together, and he did not have any fear of putting it in the middle. One time he wanted to buy in for more than, we didn't have enough chips. So he had these two like Chinese balls that he would roll around in his hand. And I said, well, Alec, you should just make those each worth $500,000. That way, when you go all in, you can just put your balls. I'm going to put my balls on the table. And that's exactly what he did. But Alec had just built a 50,000 square foot house in Beverly Park and put the most insane poker room in it you've ever seen, that set right off of a 3-story wine cellar with like the greatest wine collection in the country, and wanted to start having games at his house. So what are we going to do? Say no to that? He basically wanted our game to come to his house. So the game wasn't, but he didn't need Molly because he had his own staff, right? And what Toby did for Molly is, there's a guy named Cliff from New York who's a big hedge fund guy. We just called him New York Cliff. And he's the guy who ran the big kind of version of our game in New York. But their game was very disorganized. They had millions of dollars unpaid, and it was they'd get together like at sporadic times. And so Toby says after we had a game that night, me, Toby, and Molly were standing there with Cliff, and he's like, Cliff, we're going to start playing a lot over at Alec's house. You should have Molly come to New York and get your game organized and run your game for you. And Cliff said, that sounds like a great idea. So we handed Molly New York on a silver platter. And then she writes a book, and, Sorkin's movie makes it seem like Toby's this awful guy who ripped this game away from her. And that just never, ever happened. Not even close. Now, he did ask her to dance like a seal one night for $1,000 tip. But he was trying to make a point. His point was, you're getting too comfortable. You're making too much money. You should dance like a seal for this $1,000 tip. He's like, clap your hands. And she wouldn't do it. To her credit, she wouldn't do it. But she didn't need $1,000 when she was making $30,000 a night, and he still gave her the $1,000. She said the guy was a cheap tipper. Cheapest tip he ever gave her was $1,000. Where I come from, that's a lot. That's a lot of money. And the guys who are running the game shouldn't really have to be tipping the girl. She should have been chopping up the money with us. Let's face it. That's how any other game in LA that's private, how they all work. If some host is taking in big tips, but she's partnered with 2 other guys who are putting this thing together, they're all chopping that money up.
It's an operation, yeah.
Yeah. So, we never asked her for a dime. And then she started taking the dealer's money. Manny would get tipped almost as much as she did, but Manny, I felt, earned it. He's the guy who had to sit there and sweat getting yelled at by, guys who were taking a $500,000 bad beat, and then, Manny came to me later on. He's like, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to, lose my spot. Because there was a couple players who, would get really mad and felt like Manny was bad luck, and Molly was trying to use that as leverage to get him out. So she's like, if you want me to keep you in the game, you got to start giving me a piece of your action. Damn. So that's not in the movie, So Molly got, she turned into a straight up hustler, and I take nothing away from her for it. But, the story just wasn't accurate. So my book tells a very accurate depiction of what really happened.
And you mentioned some other people. Jamie Gold was notoriously in that game as well.
Jamie made the gameplay even bigger than. The game played big. When Jamie came in, he was pretty fresh off the heels of his win. And one thing I'll give to Jamie is. He during those first 6 months, man, he could fire bullets like Stallone. He was just firing away, and there's some big pots, man. He broke a few hearts. One guy I know in particular is a buddy of mine, had him dead to rights on he'd flopped a straight, and Jamie went like runner to a flush for like $500,000, and I think that guy stopped playing poker after that. it was a some big swings. But we also had a lot of fun playing with Jamie. He was good for the game.
So there was a hand. Was it like the character was Harlan against Bad Brad, where it was flop full house and then it was runner kings?
All right, so first of all, throughout the movie, when the movie was being made, as opposed to Molly's book, because if you read the book and then watch the movie, you'll see the movie's obviously far better written. Molly was calling me, and she kept saying, "Oh, Sorkin wants you to be an advisor on the film," but it never got to like them cutting me a check. But she did call, and do you remember any hands? So all the big hands that are in the film are hands that I gave Molly, and some of the one hand that you're talking about, some of the actual language that was used to describe the hands is exactly like the way I gave it to her, except for the fact that they took that hand and applied it to me and Bad Brad. Well, there was the Bad Brad hand. First of all, there was never a hand where I lost to Bad Brad and got rattled. I knew who Bad Brad was from the beginning, and I don't even think Molly brought him in. Me and Toby played with him out at Rick Solomon's summer pad in Malibu, and I think they called him Malibu Brad back then. And we're like, ooh, this guy's a treat. And I got to tell you, Wayne, I've never in my life seen somebody as bad as this guy. Like the first night we played with him at Solomon's, then we played with him actually at Toby's house. And we had other games that Molly wasn't a part of. So there was a game at Toby's house, and he showed up there, and there was this big hand with Rick Solomon, and Rick decides to bluff all in. It's probably at least $100,000. I don't remember how much was out there. And Bad Brad, he just kind of looks at it, and he always had this like weird look in his face. He said, I call. And Rick's like, yeah, you got me. I just got jack high. And he turned over jack high, and Brad turned over jack high too. He called with jack high, not because he was a fucking genius, because he had no idea what his hand was. He didn't know the difference between a straight and a flush. How often does that happen? So
anymore.
So it was Toby and I who pulled him aside. I tried to give him some like the poker DVDs I'd produced. We tried to give him books. He didn't seem interested. And, we knew like Alec Gores had 10 million invested with him in his hedge fund. And that guy lost six figures every time he played. So the hand between him and me that night was all just completely, that's fiction. I don't ever remember Brad ever winning. He may have had one winning night one time. But the hand that happened after that put the nail in my coffin, where it goes, I think Queen 7-7 on the flop, and my character had queens, and this Prince character, who in real life is Rick Solomon. Oh, okay. Yeah, in real life it was Rick Solomon, and I think in the movie, it goes like kings. Yeah, in real life it was running aces. They changed it to running kings. I don't know why, but in real life that hand was with a guy named Dave Garden, who's a monster player. Like Dave is one of the biggest Vegas players there is. That I know. I mean, he's the guy who will bet $1,500 a spin on video poker. He'll bet $20,000 a hand on three spots in blackjack, all day long. And it was actually Dave Garden and the guy from New York Cliff. Dave had made an announcement to the room. He said, "Okay, guys, if I win a pot over 300,000 in the next orbit, I'm going to give you," and he pointed to this woman named Bird who was massaging his feet. "I'll give Bird $5,000, and I'll give Snowman, this dealer with white hair, we call him Snowman, 20,000." And Snowman was dealing on a break, and from Manny would bring him in as a relief dealer. 20,000 would have changed Snowman's life. Okay. And when he peeled off that second ace, you could see him almost like trying to put the fucking thing back in the deck. It was so funny. But Dave was just like, what are you going to do? That's my luck. I mean, he flopped the stone nuts, and the guy goes runner all in to crush him for a $750,000 pot. But so they made that the big losing hand for me, where I lost the $1 million to Solomon. And it was a totally different hand, you know. And I don't blame him. It's a great hand, you know. Yeah, that's some of the differences. You know, there are a lot of things that were accurate, though, throughout the movie. You know, the biggest difference being Molly never ran the game, and Molly was never kicked out of the game. But she did go screw up a bunch of shit in New York and made a bunch of problems for herself. You know, that was too bad. No one wished her ill will up until her book came out. I was very close with her. You know, we were actually supposed to have drinks at the Four Seasons like 3 nights before the feds raided her and took her to jail. Yeah. So.
So you didn't have any involvement in the New York game, right?
No, the only involvement I had is I kind of kept tabs on it a little bit. There were some other games going on. Guys from New York who would come play with us. I knew a little bit about, you know, some of the, like, you know, when she got roughed up by the Italian guys, I knew that early on. And Irv Gotti, who, the record producer, he would play with us from time to time. And I know Irv had, I don't want to say is running a game in New York, but I know there was a big game in New York, underground game in New York that Irv would go to that was kind of like a parallel game to Molly's game. So I'd always hear stories about what was going on. But, you know, at that point, it was getting close to 2008, right? And around 2008, and that's when just the shit hit the fan for for me. The market crashed and hurt a lot of guys. So all of a sudden the game, you know, you could feel it in the game. And then when Ruderman got popped and they came after him, they put a $750,000 lien on my house. You know, so I had a house that was worth $3 million. The market crashed. It was worth 1.2. Then the next thing you know, I got a $750,000 lien on top of that. So my life was going down the shitter. Then, you know, the whole financial world was falling apart. You know, I got stiffed like $8 million from my business inside of 18 months. So, you know, that led to like a heart attack and all kinds of stuff, you know. They make it seem in the game like it was that $1 million loss that led to the heart attack. I won that $1 million loss back in 3 weeks. You know, I did have the deal with Toby, the deal that they talk about, and it was not advantageous, the deal, but Toby also didn't enforce it. You know, he just kept tabs on all of his winnings. You know, he enforced it up to getting paid back. You know, I had to give him 50% of my wins until he was paid back, which he got paid back almost instantly. He knew he would. I mean, hell, we'd been playing in the game together for 4 years. He knew what I was going to do in the game, you know. But he had 50% of me up until he got paid back, and then he wanted 50% for a year, free roll. And, you know, there's no way I was going to overcome that. I knew that from the beginning when I took the deal. And at the end, he's like, I was never going to enforce it. I just wanted to see how sharp it would make you. You know, but even if you win $100,000 one night, he gets 50. You win $100,000 another night, he gets 50. Third night, shit, you lose $100,000. You're even over 3 sessions, and he's, you know, looking great. And even though I could go, you know, him and I could go like 8, 9, 10 sessions straight with no losses. You just catch a few bad ones, you know, and I knew it'd be all over. You know, your bankroll would be depleted. So that kind of shut me down.
Were there any names in? Did you know about any other names in the New York game? I think they said A-Rod like went there. Or?
The first time I saw A-Rod, It's funny. I tend to be. I think I was just in all the right places at all the right times when a lot of these big names were just getting in the game. Like when Affleck first walked into a poker room at Hollywood Park with Amir Vahidi, I was there. The big game broke out. And Huck Seed showed up, and Antonio Esfandiari showed up, and then when A-Rod first came in, he came to, it was it Commerce? I think it was Hollywood Park, and he just came to watch, and then he played some limit. Then one night he showed up at Alec Gore's house just to watch, and he watched the game all night. First time he played was over at this record producer's house, and Molly was involved with that game, and then there was a game she put together where they all got a private jet and went to Florida, I think, and he was involved with that. But he was not a regular player. His name was so big that he gets mentioned every time they mention our game.
Sure.
But he was just kind of come around watching, I think, trying to get a feel for it. But yeah, any player you can think of, you can ask me about, I'll give you the real story. Affleck played with a lot of heart. Damon, the time he showed up to play, he's definitely not Mike McD. He's a great guy though. But he dumped. It was like 45,000. Basically, Affleck wrote me the check that night for him because he didn't bring any money. And I hope Matt stiffed him and didn't pay him.
I doubt that. Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms. But, one of the things, speaking of rounders, this goes on to the next topic, how, Worm in rounders could be a mechanic and manipulate a deck. And, you might have some tricks for the audience to showcase on why you should probably stay away from private games from untrusted sources.
And a lot of guys, especially you youngsters out there, think you can't get cheated. I'm here to tell you that you can. And now there are a lot of guys out there who just know how to do one or two things, like a holdout or some type of false deal, or dealing with paper down, which with marked cards. There's a lot more marked cards out there than you guys would think. But I'll just give you an example of how a deck can be manipulated. We'll take the 4 aces, and I'm just going to put them in at different spots throughout the deck. Okay. We'll get them lost. We'll shuffle it up.
Where'd they go?
Where did the aces go? They're lost somewhere, right? Now my hands are cold, but let's see how I do here. Okay. So I can do that all day long. And say you are looking to, if you call the aces to the bottom, and you have to beat the cut, that can be beaten really easily. If someone else is cutting and you're playing in a home game, and that those aces were there, and you're gonna cut them into the middle, that can be beaten with one turn like that. I've got the aces to the bottom. Okay, and I can deal them right off the bottom of the deck. That's coming right off the bottom.
Yeah. I mean, even
missed one.
Missed or an ace, no.
If you're dealing with marked cards, say you got a lot of marked cards, they can be read from across the room, but if you don't know the cipher, you'll never be able to figure it out. So if a guy is dealing and he sees a card he wants as he's dealing around the table, right? He'll just hold that ace out for himself. And that's dealing seconds. I can deal that ace anytime I want, keep it right on top. And then, it's really easy to stack cards. You stack one card on the bottom and a couple on top when you're calling cards in from the muck. And you can deal sets all day long. There's so many and that's lone wolf stuff. Now imagine you got a guy to your right who's your partner, who's an ally. You get there's games that guys go into where 3 or 4 of the guys in the game are mobbed up, and they're all there to get the money from one guy. And I know this for a fact because I had a past life, being involved with some of these characters. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but one thing I will say is whenever I took someone down, I did have I was raised in the church in the Midwest. I had a real kind of moral philosophy about who I would take down, which probably made it a lot more dangerous for me because I took down like real scumbags when I did it. But I was young in my 20s and I had balls of steel and I didn't care. I didn't think that they would actually use the gun that I saw, in tucked away under the vest. But there are a lot of games in LA right now, for instance, where guys will show up, very wealthy guys, and maybe them and 2 other guys are the only guys there who are not playing for the house. And I could name one of these games. I won't, but I'm sure it would be a game that you've heard of. And if I named some of the celebrities in it, you would definitely know who it is. So guys need to be careful playing in these big private games because more often than not, they're crooked. Now, when we played with Toby, by the time I got to that level, and I'm not saying that I never, first of all, we had a dealer, so I wasn't dealing. Not that you have to be dealing to, but when you put a shuffle master and a center dealer in the mix, that takes care of a lot of it, right? And that's something that you can get at a casino. Another thing I would tell your guys, if they are going to run a home game, is to make sure you just doing the simple thing of adding regulation shuffling. There's a reason why casinos do riffle, box, riffle, and then cut card. Okay, there's a reason. It's a smaller cut card, but that reason is because it trips up a lot of the maneuvers for stacking the deck during the shuffle. I can stack the deck while I'm shuffling it and pretty much deal a double duke or deal any kind of hand I want. But if you put those things in place, it makes it very hard to reverse the cut and do a lot of things that subpar mechanics do. And there's not a lot of world-class mechanics out there, to worry about. But there's a lot of guys who know how to do a couple things really good. And, that's what you got to watch out for most of the time.
Yeah, and if we had some, stories, and myself included, I mean, I don't know if anything happened to me. There are definitely some things in retrospect people told me potentially were suspect. So, I tend to, I didn't really go in any private environments until quarantine is just no real choice. But
well, here's why the young guys have a problem with believing that they can get cheated. They've played so many hands online, right? They've seen so many scenarios, right? So when they hear about some double duke, they're like, dude, that happens all the time. Well, not really. You don't always, not under, these certain circumstances. If you feel funny about something and you are an experienced player like yourself, there's a good chance that something funny happened, So I always tell guys, watch who dealt and look at the relationship between who dealt and who's taking down the pot.
Yeah.
And, just be cautious. Because like if you wound up at a game with me and I was the dealer, like in my prime, I'll give you an example of something that not many people in the world can do but this is the kind of thing that can happen. Now this is a shuffle deck and I am not stacking it at all. Okay. The only thing that I need to know is, and we'll use this as a cut card here. Okay. Let's just say that some hands are out. I'm just putting random. I must have not shuffled this well earlier. Yeah. There we go. All right. So here's some random hands. And these are all truly random. Let me get them where you can see them in the shot here. Can you see these? We got, all right. So let's say that, that we have, let's say paper was down, meaning the cards were just simply marked. So I didn't need to, or all I needed to know was I needed to be signaled from my partner what their hand was. So he signals me and tells me he's got the queen 4 off. Okay. Now I have not done any false dealing whatsoever, but watch what's going to happen here. Okay. I'm going to burn and put the flop out, and I just dealt queen 4, and I just dealt 2 pair, and you saw me do nothing. And how's that explained? Now, so let's just say that the 9 over here gives some action. I could, now put a 2 out there. So now the hearts could be, say if he's still in, he's got like a straight draw, flush draw. So all I have to do is deal, is pair the board, and I've won the hand. So do you think I can pair the board right now?
Sure. Let's say I don't believe you.
Let's see if I can pair the board. Right. I just paired the board.
And put the third one out there. Yeah.
And that's off of a cold deck, Wayne. That's a cold deck that I did not prearrange. I didn't know what the hand was going to be. I didn't even know what hand had to win until I had the deck in my hand and you saw me there. So when you got a guy who could do that, yeah, there's cheating that's going to happen in home games.
So what are the sickest gambling stories you've ever heard of or seen?
Man, I got some good ones. I mean, the night with seeing the Queens full with Garden was a great story, only because of what made it even better was it was a $750,000 pot, and the guy had to go perfect to get it. But it was the poor bastard dealer who was going to make 20 grand and change his entire life. And had always been an unlucky guy. I think the more fascinating story would have been following that guy after the game and, see if he, jumped off a cliff. But one night we had, have you ever heard of Casey Thompson? You know who Casey is?
I don't think so. I'm really bad with names. I've seen too many.
All right, well, Casey, all the big pros know Casey. Casey used to go in, he owned All In magazine. Remember All In?
I remember, yeah.
Was out for a bit, and he was one of the investors in the Ultimate Blackjack Tour that I produced for CBS, and just a crazy gambler. One time, him and Russ Hamilton, who sure your audience might know, Russ was the World Series of Poker champion who started Ultimate Bet, who also started the Ultimate Blackjack Tour with me as a partner, and then got accused of the online scandal. He was the guy on 60 Minutes for Ultimate Bet with the God mode. And I don't know, I don't know all of the true details about that, but I know Russ is not like innocent of a lot of the things that they said he was doing. I also know he wasn't guilty of everything, and that he kept a lot of other people's names out of it. But I had nothing to do with it. Nothing. I swear to God, I had nothing to do with it. He used my screen name, which got looped into the names that got accused. And anyway, I was proven innocent, and anybody who's really followed it would know that. But one day Russ is we're all out having drinks, and Russ says, I wonder how fast a man could shimmy up that tree. We're in like Aruba. It was like a palm tree. He's like, because he's like, oh, I could get up there in 3 minutes. Russ said, oh, I bet it'd take you at least 5 minutes to get up there. I bet you $10,000. Casey shot up the tree in like 30 seconds and comes back down. Russ gives him the $10,000, but they had a golf bet the next day for $1 million that they had already pre-arranged. Casey's hands were cut up, like just sliced to hell. So the next day on the golf course, he's slicing it left, right, and loses $1 million to Russ. And that would be one of like a million gambling stories that started with Casey. My first 6-figure loss at the Viper Room, Casey shows up drunk and, hammered. And he's standing up the whole time he's playing. And he's just kind of wobbling. And I finally get pocket fives and flop a boat. And then he goes, no, I flopped a set. It was like 5-6 deuce. And the turn was a 10. On the turn, Casey goes all in. I snap, call. And then the river comes out. It's another 10. And Casey looks at his hand. He's like, all right. You win. He throws his hand into the muck. The hand hits the table and bounces and turns over. He had a 10 in his hand, and he didn't realize. And it was the board was paired. So he basically backed into a bigger full house and didn't know it. So I had never lost 6 figures, and I was just like, I can't let this happen. And there was another guy at the game that night, Steve Brill, who's the guy who directed the Mighty Ducks movies and a bunch of stuff. Brill had taken a bad beat from Casey too. So after the game, Brill pulls me aside and he's like, Houston, invite Casey to my house. So we invite Casey up to Brill's house, and we kept playing all night long. The night ended. Brill and I got all of our money back, obviously. And Casey was like puking in Brill's toilet by like 6 a.m. But by like 10 a.m., he showed up right over by Hotel Chateau Marmont with a garbage bag full of cash. It's like, here you go, bud. But great gambling stories like that used to happen, all the time. And I don't know, we had a lot of fun. But I saw some guys, get really, really hurt too.
Yeah, this world can get really ugly. And the thing is, like, the problem with the poker and gambling world is the magnifying glass and the spotlights on there. Like other industries, people get hurt like crazy too. It's just potentially a little bit slower, and the numbers can potentially be a lot bigger too. Yeah, and
and I'm not saying that you can't avoid going into deep debt when you're playing in a licensed casino, but more often than not, like when you play in these private games, these like Russian guys will just keep giving you credit. They'll let you. They know what your assets are. They'll let you go as deep, and what their means of collecting are. Right. That's why guys need to be careful, because you're not going to get that line of credit at the bike or at a California casino. Because I don't know if people know this, but you can stiff a California casino if they give you that credit, and there's nothing they can do about it legally. Now, in Nevada is the only state in the union where that can't happen, So that's why you don't see big lines of credit coming out of California card rooms, right? And that doesn't mean that some guy off the side isn't going to give a guy credit to go play at the bike, but it's a safer atmosphere, that the regulations for the game are, on the up and up. You hope they are. We hear things about. I'm curious to get your take on the whole whatchamadoodle. What's his name? Scam.
The puzzle.
Yeah, those things can happen, right? I'm sure that the technology inside and out on how it works at the bike. I'm sure if you wanted to set up a scam like that, you could easily set it up. But there's just such a disadvantage in the long run for doing that, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of it's just like, professional reputation. Like, the audience may not know, like, I don't take tips. Like, there are a couple that were, I know them well, and they just, like, insisted. I just, like, I stay clean, and, like, I don't really play with the pool. I've recently, during quarantine, I've had to play with the player pool, but and it just, I've taken certain stances, and it might be excessive, but it just.
So where are you at when the game's going on these days? Like when the game is actually, once they start back up, are you in the booth? Are you in the back?
For Live at the Bike, at the current state, I put together the games. I had people know in the casino sector, I don't really play No Limit anymore, but if I have to do a prop, sure. But I commentate, and there's a director, and there's like some other stuff. So a lot of it is a big trust system. We're always trying to increase security because it's a very serious matter. But really, it's just like the people who are in the game, the people running the game, we're all known, and we try to answer, like, especially with everybody involved. We don't want to publicize stuff, but we try to be as open as possible. And
right.
Again, it's our professional reputations are on the line. So
Sure. Well, a lot of people don't realize that it was as early as, I think, the 90s, maybe 80s. Up into the 80s, I think California card rooms were still past the deal.
Yeah, that's hand dealt by the players.
Yeah. Now, do you know how much shenanigans were going? There were two in those days. There were two teams of kinds of cheats. There were the Vegas cheats and the card cheats and the California card cheats. And because the structure was so different in both places, if a California cheat came to Vegas, he didn't do as well. And if a Vegas cheat went to California, he didn't do as well. They each had their own thing clocked. Yeah. But a lot of guys, a lot of the old Vegas guys, one thing that they were really good at was that they were holdout specialists. So, this is before shuffle masters. And they may be playing a game of 7-card stud or whatever the game was, and they go to throw the hand in the muck, but they're holding back a couple cards, and then so if you were really good at doing holdouts and switch outs, then like here's like if you had a 10-6 and you could literally just be, ruffling through the cards like this. And, I've just switched it out for aces. You know what I mean? So these guys are really good at doing, those kind of holdouts. And that is what happened in all these, games back then. So the point is, if you can give a guy an edge, a spot where he can cheat, someone will. So that's why I say play in a casino, because they've taken away almost every ability to do that by the way the deck is shuffled, by the way the cut card is used, and now by the way that the shuffle master is implemented. And the shuffle master doesn't have to be part of it. If you're truly doing the shuffle procedure right, you're pretty protected. Because I know they don't use shuffle masters in like the World Series of Poker. There's just too many tables. But just a few years ago, you passed the deal, and there's great surveillance footage. I saw some not long ago. The guy's dealing seconds. He's obviously trying to hold back the first card, and you can see him just taking the second card. He's doing it so horribly, but nobody spotted it. And there's a great one I saw. This is on surveillance. The guy cuts the deck like this, and he just picks it up like that, and people don't notice, that's not completing the cut. That's putting the deck back how it was, and people aren't, always able to spot stuff like that. And a good cheat knows how to be at a table where guys won't spot it, knows when to do it.
I wanted to say another safety measure is security. There's cameras everywhere, and we're being,
Right.
everybody's being watched, and also like a lot of the documents that I deal with it, like other people are watching too. So basically,
No, that's what's so great about
I do
Live at the Bike. You've got multi-cams, not just in the room like a casino, but on the game itself.
Yeah.
So, I would suggest to anybody who's looking to play in a square game, and get better, because now with Live at the Bike, you can go, you're going to have a square game, and that you can then go back later and look at what you did and the decisions you made and become a better player because of it. I think it's a great thing.
And definitely, like, I'm almost hit your 20 experience-wise, so if I, see anything off, then, it could bring my, or I address it too, because it's like, even if something isn't necessarily going on wrong, but it looks bad, then we have to just deal with it.
Well, I wanted to ask you, what is the shadiest thing that you've seen in all the years you've been doing this?
Oh man, I mean, the thing is, like, reputation-wise, I tend to stay on the cleaner side. I definitely crossed into some gray areas I'm not happy with, and even quarantine time, I haven't been necessarily happy with some of the situations I've been in. But in general, it's like, really, you don't know, like you said, the legal casino industry is the safest you can ever be. So I tend to be on that side, even if when you hear about fantastical win rates and wins yours, it comes with a certain amount of risk, and you're not always going to get paid what that dollar is. So I've always stayed on the side of what, I don't need to maximize what I potentially see or am told, but I just need to make sure that whatever I participate in is just 99% plus chance everything's going to be.
Yeah, that's the other big thing that I didn't mention is getting paid. When I walked away from the games in LA, I hadn't played in really years, and I moved to Phoenix. I was out in Phoenix for a year up until recently. And when I first got out there, I was invited to play in a big game in Scottsdale. And the guy staked me for 50%. And I won $54,000. Took a year to get paid. Okay. So
you got paid.
It was like I earned that money like I was working at a factory for a year, the way I had to pound away to get it back. But you don't have about that when you're at the bike. That pot gets pushed to you, you can go to the cage and collect the money at the end of the night. Now if you got a side bet going on or a prop bet, that's different, but still you're more likely to get paid playing in a licensed room. And we never had, problem. The only time our game ever got stiffed, this one guy came to the game once who was a professional basketball player. And he plays in games around LA, scumbag, this guy. So he came in and decided to take a shot at us. It wasn't a lot of money, because at that point our game was, big winner was $300,000 on average, big loser the same. He lost around 50,000 and decided not to pay. He said, I was cheated. He lost the money in a hand. He lost 28,000 of it. I got stiffed. But the rest of it, the nail in his coffin was done by Todd Phillips, the director of The Joker.
Hangover.
Yeah, Todd would cheat. There was never any cheating that happened in this game. The guy lost a legitimate hand, just decided to take a shot and not pay, and and he was blacklisted. And I finally got him back. I ended up at a game about a year later that he was at with a guy that I brought, who ends up losing about the same exact amount, and this guy had won that amount. And the guy who was hosting the game, I said, yeah, he'll be paying that debt. I said, he stiffed our game. That's what he owes. So my buddy's not paying the money. This guy's paying it. And they got it out of him. So I got it back. But that guy was just total scumbag. Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't have to worry about that at the bike.
Yeah, don't have to worry about the bike or just legal casinos in general. And like one of the things to notice is like who has an incentive. Like if like a lot of recreational poker players, they're just there to match cards or they're to bluff out a pro or just like hang out with their friends. Like all that's once you get to a certain level is okay. You already know what they're there for. When incentives start going away from that, then you start hitting into
you
water.
you can see when guys are working together and stuff. It's not like there's not collusion and things that happen in casinos. Like I don't want anyone to think that
everyone's
they
gonna look
shouldn't.
after themselves. Yeah, like just you don't have to be as hardcore and paranoid as like me. And I know people like way more than me, or just like never even touch like even close to the gray areas. Like where I've definitely, when you play high stakes poker, it's never gonna be like super clean. So yeah,
You are 100% right.
So
if somebody can get an edge, they'll get that edge whether they're in a home game or at the commerce or at the bike, if they can. So you always have to be cautious. You don't have to be paranoid, but
it's better to err the side of being paranoid. I mean, the thing is, it's like if you like, I don't know. Everybody's different, I guess, because some people function better in different arenas. So I don't want to.
I used to say everybody's out to get you. Paranoid's just good thinking, but that was when I was mostly rounding home games. But there's poker's going to have an interesting ride over the next few years. What do you see as being? Where's it go now? Are these heads up things going to become boring or going to get bigger?
I think we talked about this off camera, and I do mention this in commentary. At least Live with the Bikes case is to just showcase like the LA poker scene. Basically, No Limit Hold'em is the most watched form of poker, but
it always will be.
Yeah, it always will be because I always say what makes No Limit Hold'em fun to watch makes it terrible to play, because it's like you get to watch people's angst on camera, but when you're actually the one there, it's like not as fun. But the Limit Hold'em scene is actually slightly healthier in the legal casino area, not necessarily the private game sector, but just like at least in every environment it's different. So I'm from the Bay Area. I went to school in San Diego. I'm in LA, and of course I traveled to Vegas. So at least these four areas, I'm relatively familiar with the culture and their development. So when it comes to televised poker, and shout out to PokerGo in Las Vegas, they're doing a great job. So I think we're just trying to showcase, starting from dramatizing a little bit, but just an inside look on what we're doing what poker's like in these sectors, because that Chris Moneymaker fantasy is like, yeah, it exists, but it's literally like winning the lottery. Like, yeah, somebody's gonna win the tournament, but if you actually want to explore and traverse this world, like back in the day, like you mentioned certain names like Antonio Spendiari, Phil Locke, Phil Hellmuth, Phil Ivey, Daniel Negreanu, like that was an era. Then my generation was an era. Like Doug Polk and Ryan Fee's generation was an era, and then just like every passing generation, and just like there's a lot of people. Shout out to like Phil Hellmuth and Negreanu and Spendiari. They're like still around.
Oh yeah,
it's like in John G. Wanted. They're like a lot of people are not around anymore, but you just learn how to navigate this world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, because that was my era coming up with all those guys, and I played with a lot of them, and the guys that you don't hear, they're like, where did Hoyt Corkins go? Where did there's those guys who
all in.
Some of them go away for a while and come back. Like Huckseed kind of disappeared off the scene for a while and he came back. Lane Flack, it's like you don't hear him for a while and he comes back. Some are gone forever. But yeah, the new guys I don't know as well. I'm familiar obviously with Doug Polk and the whole thing, but I can tell when I watch the newer guys play, the vast difference between the way they hold themselves and the way they think about the game compared to the guys of kind of the Helmy and Negron US Fondiara era, and prior to that. There's a difference. And I think that the players are getting better. I do think they're getting better.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't know if there's interesting to watch, in my opinion.
The problem is what's interesting about what they do isn't necessarily visible. Because the thing is, like, the advent of solvers a year ago, I was definitely behind, and I'm not like as hardcore, but I obviously associate with a lot of people who do a ton of solver work, so I kind of get the gist of things. And it's like, yeah, things have changed, but the interesting thing is, like, okay, so this computer with this setting, proposes this line with these balances and frequencies, and then how does your opponent compare to that? And then you're just like adapting your play to, whereas like in live poker or the way that things used to be, it's like you try to pinpoint almost exactly what your opponent's trying to do. But when players become more balanced, so that study is just like, it's more tangible in a discussion format or like a monologue like teaching format, and you can't really just like, when you see two people battling, you don't see what's going on internally. And
especially if it's online, like you said, it makes for some really advanced level play. But for me, look, and this is also kind of the television producer in me too. What would I rather see? I know that the whole card showing all in hands wasn't going to last forever. We knew that was an evolutionary process, and it had its time. But watching Doug Polk and like Negreanu play heads up for hours, to me, I would rather have root canal. So, but I said this in a recent card player article I was writing. I don't know if I've turned it in yet. One that'll be coming out. But if you give me like a guy like Lane Flack and Doug Polk, but Polk has to match him shot for shot after every hand. Now that would be fun to watch. Get some of the old school guys who could, like Lane, could drink all day long and play his ass off. So handicap Polk on that level and put them together. That would be a lot of fun to see. Now, I know not impossible to do at the bike. They serve drinks, don't they?
Probably the environment you're describing is more for like private, and it's easier if again, poker was, there's an aspect that's like playing with strangers, which is most apt in like tournament poker, and then there's like playing with friends, which is most apt in the private game sector. So that there's like a balance where like, and this is always the debate of like when Helmuth says I'm the greatest, like bit large multi-tournament table fields, he probably is the greatest, but there's like different forms, and just there hasn't even been a definition of like what deserves like what. It's like, do you win the most or lifetime, or do you win most of the year? Like obviously getting invited to you're in Toby's game is like, then you're the best player in the world now.
Yeah, right. It's like there was a time when I was doing better than probably 98% of all pros in the country.
You're better than me, I guarantee you, because I know my numbers, and I know approximately your numbers. So
Phil Ivey came to the game once, and we didn't let pros in often. Lane Flack actually showed up one night with a bag of cash at the Viper Room trying to get in. We didn't even let him walk down the hall. And I like Lane, but we invited Phil both, and I wrote about this in Card Player once too. We invited Helmuth and Phil Ivey on different occasions. Both of them pulled like over 300K out of the game. Okay. So the game
Phil
is
Hellmuth,
soft.
Phil Hellmuth can still play.
Yeah, I think Hellmuth won more than Ivy. I think he won 354,000, and Ivy won like 300. But the night Ivy came, he was just to my right. So, and he made the same raise all night long. And I just waited and waited and waited. And finally I picked up like queens and just popped the shit out of him. And he had aces, but when I was driving him home that night, I ended up only winning like 28,000 or something, which was like a small win, for that game, that night, because he took all the money out of the game. But I'm driving him home and he's like, "So you must do really good in this game." I said, "You'd think?" And he's like, "Yeah, if I had this game, I wouldn't need to play anywhere else." I said, "Well, that's probably why you're not going to be invited back." But it was an honor to play with you. And we just laughed about it, So if someone is, my whole, people ask me when I was making a lot of money playing poker, they would ask me, what's the key to being a successful poker player? And my number one piece of advice was game selection. Yeah. And that's how cash players think. That's not how a tournament player can think. Yeah. But as a cash player, there's guys who would say, screw that. You got to be able to beat the best and sit down with the best. And I'm like, screw playing with the best. Let me be really good at spotting the worst and find those guys, and I'll always be successful. So the question isn't how do you become the best player, but how do you become, one way to become a successful cash game poker player is game selection.
It's something I used to be, far more competitive in many sort of games. And now, like, one of the psychology things is when you play high stakes poker and you lose, it just like, it doesn't feel good. Ideally, you're not numb, but like, that's something that nowadays I don't say like, oh, I want to quit what I'm doing. Because when you're playing high stakes and you get buried, maybe one session's okay, 2 sessions. At some juncture, you're like, I'm quitting poker. I mean, even Esfandiari and Garrett like joke about this, and Andy. But just like, at least at the juncture that I'm in now, the way I have things set up, I'm upset when I lose, but I don't go like, I need to quit what I'm doing.
So what levels are you playing at right now?
I don't. I definitely played a few higher stakes games during quarantine, but I just don't miss it. Like, part of me is like, I want to be competitive, but at the same time, I know how much these other guys are working, and I've like, and we've been around, we know how it is. Like, say we're both in the same game, and you're better than me, whether it's slight or whatever. It doesn't really make that big of a difference because we're skinning the other 7 people.
Right.
And that's the big fallacy that like people have. They're just like, oh, this guy's the best player. It's like, well, you have to look at the line, because like Antonio Esfandiari said, he's like, a life isn't like 1 rec player and like 7 pros. It's not a life. And that's the games that I used to play in and just like be stupidly happy with, because like, I'm like, I estimate that I can do okay. Now I'm just like, I guess I wish I awakened earlier, and shout out to Lyman Poker for like helping me, diversify and just like see the light. But it's just, you don't have, like, there's different ways to navigate this industry, and the whole goal is to have poker work for you, not you be a slave to poker. It's like, when you tie your identity to poker, I've seen this like over and over with pros, and I feel bad. It's not like I don't tie some of my identity to poker, but like, they're the ones that like berate Rex. They're like, you're so bad. How do you do this? When they like lose a pot, when it's like, it's just their identity is so tied into poker. And if they step back and it's like, how do I win? How do I make myself better in this environment, or make this environment better for me? Then they'll see like what they're doing is just like, they got to like not tie their identity so much with poker. But, and guys like that become real visible. That's good and bad. You have to know, like, everyone has to know how to play their table image, right? So, but once you become, I used to be able to change my table image
depending on what game I was in, you
Right.
know, and how well the people knew me.
Yeah.
Once you're famous, you can't do that,
Yeah.
you know, and that's a big part of the reason that I didn't want to go on late night poker and stuff during those days, because I didn't know where my future was, if I was going to be back in, you know, some game in Chicago where I'm just like some shtup, you know, and you know, and need to be unrecognized. So, you know, a lot of the old school pros think more in with that mentality. They didn't like it when, you know, stuff got televised at first because it changed everything. But, you know, poker is like anything, it's evolving.
It's a
And
different career
so,
move. Yeah.
yeah, and but with that evolution comes, you know, new hustles will evolve, and new ways to get over on the game will evolve, and you know, and it's just interesting seeing where it all goes, and you know, it's cool to have you know, have these great media outlets now that allow us to do that you didn't have 20 years ago. You know, there was no Poker Go, there's no Live at the Bike, there's no, you know, I mean, there was World Series of Poker on ESPN once a year, right? But so the young players, you know, they've got a lot of advantage that, you know, the old guys didn't have.
Yeah.
You know, but there's some things that they aren't sharp on yet, you know, and maybe after today seeing, you know, just how easy it is to manipulate cards. You know, I really think the young guys it's almost like the riverboat gambling era all over again. They don't think they can be cheated. And so they're not looking out for it. You get a guy who is my age or older than me at the Commerce or the Bike or Hollywood Park. Hell, they'll notice if there's the smallest little nick on a card, and you know, set up, need a new set, you know. But you know, some of the young guys let some of that stuff slide. At least that's
They
what
just
I
want to get the next hand in.
get to the next hand, because the math says get to the next hand, right?
I used to be like that. So one of the other things I miss is like another thing, like tying your identity to poker, is because poker, like, what is the ranking? Like, who is better than who? There's always people say that this guy is better than this guy, and it could be true, but there's also like a rock paper scissors element, or who's better in what environment. And there's literally no ranking. There's a World Series of Poker winner, Player of the Year, how many bracelets you have. Like for Doug Polk's case, nobody will play you heads up anymore. There's like these intangible things that like are credible, or just like if you sit down and the game fills up, or you know, this guy busts and the game breaks, or you sit down and the game breaks. There's like intangible things like that, but really it's like there's no ranking. It's so arbitrary. And
Right.
I would say like academics is slightly better, but it's like not even then. It's like, okay, you have a Harvard PhD or Stanford PhD or Berkeley PhD. Yeah, there's school rankings, but like it's just like who the hell knows? Like,
You're saying that the Hendon mob doesn't have everything ranked absolutely accurately?
Evan Mom kind of misses how many buy-ins, and that's something that I've been streaming MTTs, and you know, people can see I'm up, but they also see the reality of you know what's going on. I final table at a very high frequency, but like,
So where's the place to
like,
play for money online these days? I'm like a total. I as far as online poker, I've got to get back into it. I'm a total noob.
We're in the U.S. You know, shout out to Mac Versanik. He's anti, you know, some poker sites. Global Poker, they don't actually play for money. What happens is you buy play chips, like these gold coins, and then they happen to come with sweeps coins, which are 1-to-1 equivalent to $1. So when you cash them out. So.
And how do you buy them, with a credit card or PayPal or what?
Yeah, you just buy a credit card. I mean, I haven't bought chips in a long time. I think I used debit or credit, and then I just bought X gold coins. And then
Do they limit your bankroll, your buy-in? Because I know back in the day, everyone had to know somebody who worked at a site to get like 50 grand on the site. You know.
So I don't like. I've always been like this. I only buy in like 1 to 2K every single time and just like run it up. Like, because the thing is.
Okay.
When you play, like, okay, that's not true today because win rates are lower. But back in the day, you could just, like, play small stakes and just, like, you'll be in the highest stakes within, like, 2-3 weeks. Like, it doesn't even take that
Right.
time. But nowadays, like, I'm not even playing big. I mean, I play the higher stakes MTTs, but, like, cash games, I just, like, stay small because like I don't even know what these. Actually, I know a lot of the people who play in the high stakes. I'm like I don't want to play with these guys. And like I obviously follow some on Twitter that I don't.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn more about him. I mean, this like I have an article in this episode of Card Player. It was I didn't know about this cat. What's his name? I guess he's the winning Jonathan. They've covered it up on this.
There's too many names now. Like one of the things I tell people I coach, I'm just like, who you see on camera is like a tip of the iceberg. There's so many just like insanely good players that you never even heard of. Because obviously a lot of people who play on camera willingly or decided that was the right thing to do for their career.
Right.
There's just like so many studied and incredibly good players, and like, even since I've been active, or even since like the Helmut Negreanu Esfandiari era, it's like. There are just so many talented players. Like it's just cards. Like if you look at the top like 50,000 people, there's like quite a bit of proficient players. Then you get to top 200,000, 250,000. It's like, really, do they even play that bad? Like it's like even a lot of people that the games are built around. Maybe not necessarily your era because you're finding people who don't get better, but a lot of the recreational players that I play with, they just get better really fast because they're smart people and they're successful in life. Like it's just cards.
And while a lot of the guys didn't get better, it wasn't because it was because they weren't trying. We found guys who looked at this as a recreational game, just on a really high level, But the guys who did take it seriously, like Alec Gores, like when Alec first started playing. It was like Christmas, I mean, it was fantastic because unlimited bankroll and didn't know what he was doing. Well, Alec has bought 90 companies, or when I knew him, he had bought 90 companies and never lost $1 on one of them. He is a self-made billionaire. Didn't take him long to figure out. He didn't care. But when he decided he wanted to learn how to play,
it's not that
he started figuring it out, and that's when I heard he got in a big hand with. It was basically our game, but I wasn't there. All of them flew to Texas to play with Andy Beal, who the famous guy from that book where he played the corporation, And they got into a big hand with Alec. Alec and him got into a big hand for I heard it was like over $50 million. And Beal had to take a phone call in the middle of the hand. Like a 20-minute phone call. Yeah. And Alec had pushed all in. And the phone rings, and it was like his son, and there's some kind of problem. He had to take the call. 20 minutes later, he hangs up the phone. He's like, I call. Snap. And he lost $54 million to Gores right there. Gores decided, when he decided he wanted to play good, he started. And another guy who did that, who played with us when he wasn't good, and I watched him get good, was Guy Le Liberté, the creator of CERT. I won, I think my first time I ever broke like 400,000 in a single night was the first time Guy played. And it was either Guy or Jamie Gold. I can't remember, one of the two. But Guy was just an animal forever, but he eventually started getting better, and you could see it. You could. I mean, he they loved it when he played blackjack because he gave back a portion of what he was making to the casino every year. But then he got smart enough and said, I'm going to start playing poker. I think I've got a better shot at poker. And look, he came from the streets, I think Bobby Baldwin actually discovered him on the streets of Canada. Really? A few years later, the guy's the richest, highest paid entertainer in the world. Got 20% of a company bought for $1 billion, and is pulling in $300 million a year back in the mid 2000s. God knows what it is now, but his poker game got better.
Yeah, something that the audience may not know is especially when you're young, like you're a teenager in your early 20s, you see all this money on camera, you're like, oh my gosh, is that a ton? It's not. Like there's money you've never even heard of from people you've never even heard of. And I remember, playing. I know one of my buddies / mentors is watching this right now, but I had no idea who I was playing with, high stakes poker with, and then I find out I'm like, I just checked raised this guy. That's fucking great. That's real fucking great. I just ruined my life over like $1,000. But yeah, just like it's really helpful when these guys like you. They like what you represent, and they just mentor you. It's just like invaluable. It's something that
yeah,
never picked up. So.
Yeah, I had some great mentors in the game on all different sides of it. From the kind of dark side to the casino side. When I started playing at Hollywood Park, I don't know why I chose Hollywood Park when I did. We're talking 90s, early 90s.
You like,
I could have gone to Commerce or and I went to all those places, but for some reason I felt comfortable. I love the scumbag smell of it. When you first walk in, it's just smell of scumbaggery throughout the room. Like if you played at the $1 limit table, you would be playing literally with homeless bums who had borrowed enough money to make a buy-in, and there was something just seedy and sexy about that to me. And I remember just playing. It was all limit back then. There was not a no limit game in sight. And I worked my way up from the bottom, I played poker all my life, but I hadn't played in a casino. So I wanted to learn, and I never played limit. But that's all there was. There was limit poker. And, but then I spotted, I was cashing like 5 racks off of like a 10-20 game one night. And this guy, Ron Paylett, who is the host over there, says, "Hey, why don't you come play a real game?" And it was the game in the very back, and I never even asked about it, but I knew it was different. There's something different going on there, and that was the pot limit game. And it was a 5-5 blind pot limit, but it played bigger than all the other games in the casino.
Yeah.
And so I started playing it, fell in love with it, won my first night playing. They always say the new guy, always you get that first win, you'll never want to quit. And I just loved it. And there were a lot of people in that game that taught me a lot about poker. Sharon Goldman played in that game, the pro Sharon, and her husband, Dan, who's a big casino or online poker executive. There's a guy named Nick DeLahey who was just a monster pot limit player. Guys who, didn't go on to have huge careers, but were really good at what they did. And then we would get the occasional, when somebody would come in, the phones would start ringing, and all of a sudden there's now Antonio Esfandiari's there. This is before he was ever on World Poker Tour. And, Huck Seed is there. And who's that other great No Limit pro? I wrote about him in an article. The first time Ben Affleck lost a ton of dough in a casino. He, I don't know why his name's escaping me right now. He's fantastic, but he only plays cash games. Everybody knew him. I actually learned a lot watching him play. But Affleck, it was pot limit, and at one point Affleck goes, "You want to just make this one hand no limit?" And he says to Ben, he's like, "Is that a legitimate offer, sir?" And Ben kind of confused Ben, but Ben's like, "Yeah." It's like, "I accept." And, Affleck turned over 10s, he turned over queens, and he busted Affleck for everything he had. Wow. And I wrote about that being a big lesson for Ben, because it was his first night in a casino playing in a big game. Amir Vahidi brought him. And I guess Amir was coaching him, probably. That, yeah. I'm sure Amir was, God rest his soul, I'm sure Amir was suckering him for lessons, telling him he was going to make him a good cash game player. But that was a fun night, and Ben learned a lot, from that little lesson there. But I learned playing, watching guys like that, and some of the older guys, the guys like that tell the great stories.
I think, I did a little misinterpretation. I saw some people in the chat, they misinterpreted what I was saying. So, like, when I was, like, coming up, there's a group of people that were better than me and, like, kind of handheld me, and I would shout out their names. I don't think they want to be mentioned. And then they kind of, like, lost interest / moved on to other things. And then there's the TV players, like Phil Locke, Antonio Spendiari, who I played against. And then there's the people who are, like, the actual, like, crushers, successful people in the world that, like, I didn't know who they were. And those are the guys that, I mean, like, some of them have been on Live at the Bike too, but they, like, mentor me in like real life stuff, which I find is just like infinitely more important. So like, you know, I'm friends with like Garrett, Andy, and Dan, Zach, and stuff, but we rarely talk about poker. Or it's always about just like real life, because like we're kind of like been there, done that. There's no hand that we haven't seen or applied. Like I have higher appreciation when I watch them on camera. Like, wow, they do all these things that I never did. Like,
right.
Yeah, it's more like a professional respect and appreciation. For their journeys.
No, I mean, look, I played, you know, back when nobody knew who Kenny Tran was. You know, I was playing Kenny and despite what, you know, you might
phenomenal
think
player,
about Kenny, he's a monster. You know, yeah, he's a monster. And he still has kind of one foot in that old world and one foot in the new. But you know, there are a lot of guys like that are really tough customers, and you know, if you're going to play against them, you know, learn. I remember playing with Lack. We were at the Commerce, and Lack was always a funny guy.
He's amazing, man.
He just loves to. He came. He's like, let's just bust guys who are trying to grind out rent money. He's like, I just want to bust them. He's like, if you're not going to gamble, if you're here to grind out your rent money, you're going down. And he took him down too. And he busted this one kid, and it looked like his whole world had fallen apart. And Phil just turned to me. He's like, it just makes me feel so good to bust a kid who is trying to grind out his rent money.
Oh man, that's brutal. I guess I never heard of that side of him, but it's like,
well, I think the point is, if you're going to try and grind out your rent money, don't sit down with Phil Lack. Don't sit down with Phil Lack. I think you're going to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I hear stories over and over, these young kids, and it's like, you know, they're incredibly technical skilled, and just like when, like you can ask them any question, any spot, but there's, I don't want to throw myself under or other veterans under the bus, but like, it's people have stuck around for reasons, and it's not necessarily technical skill. Their other skills are actually more important. It's not like I wish I had their technical skill, but just like spending time in other places has, you know, been more fruitful, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's I'd like to get at a live game with a bunch of these new kids one day, just to so I could feel what it's like playing against them, because I know the style is so much different now. So maybe I'll head down to Live at the Bike one day, and we'll get a nice fun game going.
Sounds good. And definitely want to shout out your website, cardsharp.com, KARDSHARP.com, and you have a ton of stuff there.
Yeah, go to CardSharp, and guys, if you're interested in learning, you know, about game protection, or if you're interested in sleight of hand, that kind of stuff, it's kind of a weird site. We do everything from, you know, these kind of discussions to I'm starting my own podcast. It's called Stay Sharp.
You have a couple of
Stay Sharp podcast. Yeah, I did an episode with Steve Sear, who's a big VIP casino host, and a lot of people really love that. So I'll be doing more of those. I have to do one with you at some point, Wayne.
Sure.
And yeah, the book is here. It is. It's $1 Billion Hollywood Heist. There's me and Toby on the back.
There's a lot of pictures. You have a ton of celebrities in there.
It's a fun read. I mean, you read it. It's a quick read. You know,
it's a quick read. It's a good read. I don't want to spoil, but there's a lot of stuff in there where I'm like, oh snap! I
name the names, and I just tell what really happened, and you know, kind of like poker. I just played my hand and let the chips fall where they may.
Sounds good. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, my friend. Anytime.
And we'll have you back on, you know, I'd say stream like you were on was a preview for this, but you're welcome anytime to stream, especially when current poker events or anytime you have news.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some new things that I want to maybe update you on. We'll come back and have some fun, and who knows, maybe I'll show up live at the bike once you guys get it going, and bring a few whales with me, and we'll have a good time.
Whales? You mean VIPs? I'm just kidding. All right, guys.
All right, thanks so much.
Hope you enjoyed this, and leave comments, smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe. If you have any questions for Houston Curtis, won't be the last time that we have them on, so, you know, leave them down below. Thank you, guys.
See you later.